Sensation. It is the stimulation of our sense organs by the outer world. Eyes are sensitive to light waves, ears to sounds, skin to touch and pressure, tongues to tastes, and noses to odors. Perception. It is the act of organizing and interpreting sensory experience. It is how our psychological world represents our physical world. We can have different experiences of the real world because individuals can experience the same physical object in different ways. Basic sensory processes. Sensory adaptation. This is a process wherein our sensitivity diminishes when we have constant stimulation. It ensures that we notice changes in stimulation more than stimulation itself. Transduction. It is the conversion of physical into neural information, such as when cells in the retina change light waves to neural energy, etc. Principles of perception. Absolute threshold. The idea that some people are more sensitive than others. Signal detection theory. It assumes that a person's absolute threshold fluctuates, sometimes being more sensitive and other times being less sensitive, depending on the cost of failing to detect the stimulus. Difference threshold. It is the smallest amount of change between two stimuli that a person can detect half of the time. Perceptual set. It is the effect of frame of mind on perception. It is also a tendency to perceive stimuli in a certain manner. Vision parts of the eye cornea, a hard covering that protects the lens. Pupil, the opening in the iris. Iris, the muscle that form the colored part of the eye. Lens, the structure that sits behind the pupil. Retina, a thin layer of nerve tissue that lines the back of the eye. Contains two photoreceptors, rods for night vision and cones for color vision or bright light. Fovea, a spot on the back of the retina which contains the highest concentration of cones in the retina. How does light travel to the eye, and how does it convert light energy to neural energy? Light enters the eye at the cornea. It then passes through a liquid until it reaches the pupil. Light enters the interior of the YE through the pupil. The iris adjusts the pupil to control the amount of light entering. The light then passes through the lens, which bends the light rays. Through a process known as accommodation, muscles around the lens alter its shape to adjust to viewing objects at different distances and to allow the lens to focus light on the retina. Finally, the retina will convert light energy into neural energy. The light that hits the retina travels through several cell layers before processing begins. Note that image hits the retina upside down. The brain reorients the inverted image so that our world is right side up. The deepest layer of cells, where processing of light energy begins, is made up of photoreceptors, which have two types, the rods and the cones, which convert light energy into neural impulses. Visual acuity, our ability to see clearly, and it is dependent on our cones. 3 types of neurons in the visual cortex. Simple cells. These cells respond to very specific information, such as a bar of light oriented at a particular angle. Complex cells. These cells are sensitive to the movement of an image and respond if the image appears anywhere in the visual field. Hypercomplex cells, partially involved in integrating pieces of visual information into whole parts. Perceiving visual stimuli. Perceiving color. Theories of color. Vision trichromatic color theory reasoned that all the color we experience must result from a mixing of these 3 colors of light, red, green, and blue. Opponent processing theory. Cones are linked together in 3 opposing color pairs, blue, yellow, red, green, and black, white. Hearing, 1878. The members of the color pairs oppose one another, whereby activation of one member of the pair inhibits activity in the other. Color blindness, a weakness of deficiency in the perception of certain colors, usually resulting from an inherited pigment deficiency in the photoreceptors. Perceiving motion, the background against which an object moves. When an object moves across a complex background, it appears to move faster than when it moves across a simple background. The size of the object. Smaller objects appear to move faster than larger objects when all else is equal. We can also be fooled into thinking something is moving when it is not. Perceiving depth perception is our ability to see things in 3 dimensions and to discriminate what is near from what is far. Binocular depth cues. It relies on input from both eyes. The eyes are separated by a few inches, so the images from each eye provide slightly different viewpoints. Binocular disparity. The difference in retinal images due to the fact that our 2 eyes are separated by a few inches and is an important cue in depth perception. Reed, 2015. Monocular depth cues. It aids to depth perception that do not require 2 eyes to be effective. These cues allow people who are blind in one eye to perceive some depth. Linear perspective involves parallel lines that converge or come together the farther away they are from the viewer. Texture gradient causes the texture of the surface to appear more tightly packed together as the surface moves to the background. Atmospheric perspective. It comes from looking across a vast space into the distance in the outdoors. Interposition. The partial blocking of objects farther away from the viewer by objects closer to the viewer, which overlap those farther away. Moon illusion occurs when the moon is closer to the horizon because we see it against other cues that indicate we are looking off into the distance. Perceiving size and shape. Perceptual constancy is the brain's ability to preserve perception of objects in spite of changes in retinal image when an object changes in position or distance from the viewer. Size constancy. We see things as the same size regardless of the changing size of the image on the retina because we know what the size of the object is. Shape constancy. People know the shapes of common things, just as they know their sizes. Perceiving patterns and holes. Similarity. Gestalt law that says we tend to group like objects together in visual perception. Continuity. Seeing points or lines in such a way that they follow a continuous path. Proximity. Claims that we tend to group together objects that are near one another. Law of closure. It occurs when we perceive a whole object in the absence of complete information. The physics of sound and the psychophysics of hearing. Amplitude, or the height of the sound wave, determines what we perceive as loudness. The taller the wave is, the louder the sound. Frequency is what we perceived as sound's pitch. The higher the frequency, the higher the pitch. Purity. It is the complexity of the wave. Hearing in the brain. After the sound energy is changed to neural energy in the cochlea, the hair cells synapse with the auditory neurons that transmit the sound impulses to the thalamus in the brain. From there, the neural impulses are relayed to various parts of the brain, including the brainstem and the temporal lobes, home of the auditory cortex. The auditory pathways go from the cochlea to the inferior colliculus in the brainstem, and from there to the medial geniculate nucleus, MGN, of the thalamus. Lastly, due to the brain's neuroplasticity, it is true that people who are born deaf partly make up for lack of hearing, with heightened sensitivity of other senses, especially touch but even sight. Carnes et al., 2012. The brain is plastic and does not waste the auditory cortex. Instead, it simply takes on new sensory functions. Touch. The top layers of the skin have receptor cells that are sensitive to different tactile qualities, some to shape, some to grooves, some to vibrations and movements. These receptor cells are called mechanoreceptors. Mechanoreceptors. These are the receptor cells in the skin that are sensitive to different tactile qualities. There are 4 kinds of mechanoreceptors. Each kind has a unique profile of sensitivity. Some of the mechanoreceptors are slow to change, and others are fast with variations in tactile stimulation. Some are sensitive to fine details, whereas others are not. Like photoreceptors in the eye and hair cells in the ear, mechanoreceptors mark only the beginning of the journey from sensation to perception. Pain. It is a complex emotional and sensory experience associated with actual or potential tissue damage. It is usually very unpleasant, but people vary widely in their experiences of pain, what they think is painful, and whether they might even enjoy pain. Phantom limb pain. When people who have lost a limb feel pain in the missing arm or leg, such cases dramatically show how pain is not just a direct result of tissue damage, but an experience in the brain as well. Pain also is enhanced by one's reaction to the injury. Often the emotional reaction to pain created as much suffering as the actual tissue damage. Pain. Perception. Nociceptive pain. It refers to a pain from skin and/or tissue damage or injury. The skin has pain receptors that are sensitive to heat, cold, chemical irritation, and pressure. All these pain receptors are kinds of nociceptors. Explaining pain, gate control theory of pain proposes that the spinal cord regulates the experience of pain by gating the transmission of pain information at the level of the spinal cord. The gate is a competition between signals coming from different-sized axons or nerve fibers. More specifically, pain signals are sent via smaller nerve fibers than non-pain signals. Experienced pain is all about the balance and imbalance between signals from the pain fibers, small, relative to non-pain fibers, large. Controlling pain. Endorphins. These are the body's natural painkillers, endogenous morphine. When we are hurt, our bodies respond by releasing these substances. Sense of smell, olfaction, olfactory sensory neurons. These can be found in a small area high in the lining of nasal cavity, which are the receptors of smell. These neurons contain hair-like projections called cilia, which are similar to the hair cells in the inner ear. The cilia convert the chemical information in odor molecules into neural impulses. Olfactory bulb. It sends information either directly to the smell processing areas in the cortex or indirectly to the cortex by way of the thalamus. The primary olfactory cortex resides in the temporal lobe. The secondary olfactory cortex is in the frontal lobe near the eyes. Sense of taste, gustation. Papillae. These are the textured structures that contain about 10,000 taste buds. Taste buds are the structures inside the papillae of the tongue that contain the taste receptor cells. Taste receptor cells. Sensory receptor for taste that reside inside the taste buds. There are 5 basic taste qualities, which include bitter, sweet, salty, sour, and savory. There is an increasing evidence that a 6th taste quality, fattiness, may exist as well, but further research is needed. Gustatory cortex. It is the cortical region of the brain located in the insula area of the frontal lobe where taste sensations are processed and interpreted.